You could double your word limit for your EPQ. What would you go on and write about?
Well, I think that the debate of whether football needs an independent regulator is truly a whole EPQ in itself. And I figured that out from the sources that I've analysed. So as a lower league fan, I came into this with a very biased perspective. I read the Crouch report and I looked at articles and I had this completely one-dimensional view that some of you may remember when I was talking about radical reforms to start with. However, since progressing, I've then looked at the views of not just fans who want to alter the distribution model, but don't care about diminishing the value of the Premier League as a product to its broadcasters. But I've also looked at the viewpoints of chairmen such as Simon Jordan of Crystal Palace, Andy Holt of Accrington Stanley, Darren McAnthony of Peterborough, Thomas Sangard, that was full primary research. I had to go to speak to him face to face in person about that. And many others up and down the pyramid, in lower leagues and in higher leagues. Now, having taken all of these views into account, there's a clear conflict of interest. You've got fans in lower leagues on one hand who want improved distribution, and then you've got the owners on the other hand who don't want to diminish the value of the Premier League as a product, but contrary to popular belief, actually do agree that poor corporate governance and uneven distribution of finance are a problem. The only issue is the mechanism of delivery. Is it an independent regulator or is it a recalibrated version of the FA? Now this is an area where I truly don't know the answer to it because I haven't worked in the industry, I've just researched from the outside. And I've asked this to the contacts that I have as well as looking up online what could be the answer to this. But yeah, if I had to double my word limit, I think I'd talk more about the solutions aspect. And whether it's an independent regulator or a calibrated version of the FA. Any other questions?
I was just going to ask if I could, what was the sort of the single most important thing that you either read or what changed your mind most in that process? Was there a single source or one of those chairmen?
Was there
anything that influenced your view most?
I had three main sources to start with. Well, actually, let me just talk you through the journey. So to start with, this is actually something I regret, which is I was spending time looking at articles written by journalists and think tanks, not to be disrespectful to them, but quite frankly, a lot of them hadn't done their homework properly. The opinions were just completely ill-informed, they weren't researched properly, they were trying to drive an agenda and not looking at the other side of the coin. And essentially, when Mr. Maloney told me, I think you should look more into academic journals, well-researched and written reports, that's when my perspective started to change, because the Crouch report it comprised of Tracy Crouch, who's an MP, but she also used the knowledge and experience of specialists who previously worked in the football industry to present this view. Now, of course, some of the reforms were radical, which is when I later found out from looking at sources such as Simon Jordan, who basically described the conflict of interest with diminishing the value of the Premiership as a product. But I think, to answer your question, the biggest turning point was definitely looking at people who'd actually worked in the industry and had experience and know exactly how it works, versus looking at other people who are researching from the outside, who, not to show any disrespect, but frankly haven't even researched it as much as I have. So,
sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
As a fellow lower league football fan, I'd like to know if there's any interesting information that you found out that wasn't in your EPQ.
That's a great question. So, what did I find out that wasn't in my EPQ? The answer to that is quite a lot. So, I'd like to start off with the case studies. And it's a coincidence you asked actually, because your club, QPR, is one of those case studies. So, if you look at the QPR versus Derby playoff final in 2014, when Bobby Zamora scored the last-minute winner, that was described as the most expensive game in English football history. And the reason wasn't just the jump in broadcasting income from 7 million to 123 million. It was also the fact that you had two clubs here going neck on neck who'd completely spent beyond their means, and they needed that promotion so badly to avoid going into administration, essentially. QPR obviously got the final winner, and so QPR weren't affected as badly. But you can't overlook the risks that were taken. So QPR had 65.3 million operating losses with a 78 million wage bill, having signed players such as Charlie Austin, Carl Henry, Matt Phillips. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when you have those players and you're spending that much more beyond your needs, Derby were doing the same with the likes of Will Hughes, Tom Ince and many others. Essentially what you have is that when you get promoted, these losses are recovered because you've got a massive influx of broadcasting income, to some extent obviously, because you might continue spending in the Premiership. But to put it lightly, you can see that QPR have come off better than Derby. Derby went into administration and they're now in League One with a squad size the size of 20 players. QPR are still in the Championship, looking relatively healthy. Another case study was actually Brighton. So Brighton is celebrated as a success story, contributing 212 million to the local economy. But what I'm interested in is how many people actually know that they were operating on operating losses from 2011 to 2017, peaking at 39 million on their promotion season in 2017, as well as spending 138% of their turnover on player wages. Far from healthy. And then when they went into the Premier League, their debts increased from 128 million to 300 million. So whilst it's celebrated as a success story, I think it taught me that wealth is not health. The other things I found out about were things such as the accounting loopholes of financial fair play, and I also found about image rights. So when you look at a transfer fee in the headline, that's hardly ever what the transfer fee actually is. It tends to be paid in instalments, and you also have clubs paying players directly for image rights, which can be as much as a year's worth of salary, especially for players such as Jack Grealish. So I think that it's important that when you look at headline fees, you should acknowledge that it's probably a lot more than that in reality. Haaland's probably a good example. 52 million, no chance. Look, 2 years into the future, you'll see that, I'm telling you.
One more question, I think, guys, because I'm just looking at the time. So, Jake, you can select. Very keen.
Adrian.
How does English football's financial inequalities, how does that compare to leagues that are overseas?
That's a fantastic question. So I think with inequality you've got to look at within leagues versus across leagues. Now within leagues I actually think that English football's financial inequalities are lower than overseas because you've got each club receiving a minimum of 123 million. The range is probably somewhere between 123 million and 200 million. Whereas overseas, you look at La Liga, you've got 200 million euros going to Real Madrid and Barcelona each season because that's what all of the people watching on TV are paying to see. And then other clubs are receiving just 20 million in euros. So that's why La Liga's debt increased from 500 million to 3 billion. It was because they were having to spend beyond their means to keep up with Real Madrid and Barcelona. And so yeah, my answer to your question is that within leagues, inequality is actually better in England than it is overseas. But across leagues, it's significantly worse because other leagues haven't had a broadcasting deal that size at 3.7 billion. Nowhere near, as you saw from the chart, La Liga had half of that. And so if you're going to grow the top of the pyramid this much, and you're hardly going to distribute any of that down to the lower leagues, you're going to end up what Jaden referred to earlier as a T. It's not even an inverted financial pyramid anymore. It's literally a T. So, yeah.
Brilliant. I'm really gutted that we have to draw this to a close, but again, can we just thank Jake for